Okay, a little while ago I mentioned to you the potential for using this for combined sewer overflow. The idea would be to do some treatment ahead of the time that wastewater makes its way into the combined system. I realize this is the first time we probably thought about that, or maybe the first time you heard that we were considering it. But what would be your reaction to that? I mean, as far as, does that sound like a feasible use?
I think it's a function of what the issue is. I mean, are you looking at the clogging of these systems and then suddenly the huge loads, storm loads and overflows? Or?
Well, they're looking at, what they're looking at is putting in large tanks so that when it does overflow, it goes into a tank and then they can meter it out more slowly into a treatment facility.
Oh, okay.
But the idea is that if we can treat it before it gets into the combined system, then we're preventing a lot of.
Oh, okay. So you're assuming that these are storm run. These are primarily storm drainage systems. They are combined with sewers.
That's right.
So you're looking at the storm water aspect as the most important of them, and we're contaminating that when we put sewage into it.
Well, yes, and then when a storm event comes along, it overflows into the streams and everything else because it has too much more than the capacity of the system.
Yeah, well, you're not going to. You could impact it in a couple different ways. Number one is if you do treatment and reuse on site.
Right.
Then all of a sudden you've reduced the actual load to the whole system. So I mean, that's the obvious way to do it. The other thing is a lot of storm water issues when in combined storm sewers, it's the organic material, it's the greases from restaurants, it's the things like that cause the clogging, the clogging in the first place. Now we have used sledgehammers in sewer line pump stations, and we've had some pretty dramatic reductions in grease and things like that. And part of it is to think a bit about what a sewer is. A sewer line is a huge infrastructure for water storage that's heading towards a treatment plant, but it's not being used for treatment at all. Now, it doesn't make sense. If you're going to really, if you want to improve the performance of a treatment plant, start the treatment all the way up at the upstream end of it. And that's what we can do with a sledgehammer at homes. It's going to pre-treat the effluent. Anything you might use on site, you go ahead and use on site for irrigation. But if you have overflow, or if you don't have quite the capacity, what then gets into the sewer is already treated. And even more importantly, it's biologically active. It's got a huge population of bacteria in it that are going to clean that sewer line the whole way through. They're going to take advantages. Every time it moves, it's getting air, and so you can literally turn a sewer line into a treatment plant.
That's perfect. That's what I wanted to hear you say. Now, but mention this now. So we've done this pre-treatment ahead of time, and we're releasing in a flow with this biologically active. Combine that with stormwater now, and what would it do for road grease and other pollutants that come from stormwater?
That's an interesting question. I mean, when I go back to what we were doing for bioremediation of contaminated soil, we were dealing with petroleum products, and by virtue of the fact that we were taking an organic food source in the form of manure, growing the bacteria on that, they then were simply eating the petroleum as really a side issue. That's exactly the same thing that would happen in a storm sewer, because it's called co-metabolism. What you're doing, the bacteria don't necessarily like those compounds, they will eat them. But if you give them a good source of food, namely sewage, and let them grow on that, they're simply going to consume the rest of the stuff just because it's there. In fact, we met with the National Oil Company of Libya just last week, and that was one of their main issues. We were looking at treating processed water from oil wells, where they have a huge amount of processed water that's lightly contaminated with petroleum. And we were pointing out to them, hey, you've got a community that lives at each oil well of maybe 50 people. You've got a wastewater stream that's there. Link the treatment of the wastewater to the treatment of the processed water. You're using that as your energy source and the nutrient source to process the petroleum products.